views and opinions expressed in this podcast by the host or the guest do not necessarily reflect the views of Paranormal Buzz Radio or its sponsors. Use of any material produced by Paranormal Buzz Radio without express written consent is strictly prohibited. For information on everything Paranormal Buzz Radio has to offer, visit our website, paranormalbuzzradio.com. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Russell. Welcome to the Healing Light Podcast. I am a psychic intuitive who's been reading tarot cards for over 25 years. I'm also Reiki certified. Join me as I read cards, share intuitive messages, promote healing, and much, much more. Hi, everybody. It's Caitlin from the Healing Podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Before I get to my very special guest, Cheryl Parker, who is a certified grief expert. She also does coaching and workshops. I just want to remind people that you can find the Healing Light Podcast on the Spreaker app or anywhere you listen to your podcasts. Thank you very much for listening. And if you have a show idea, someone you'd like to have me interview, or any feedback, I welcome it. I can be found on Facebook. I have a Facebook page, The Healing Light NH, Instagram, The Healing Light, and now TikTok, The Healing Light NH. So thank you very much. So send me those show ideas. So my very special guest is Cheryl Parker. And we're going to talk about grief and what that means to everyone, and how we can get through it. And we'll welcome her expertise. So Cheryl, welcome to the Healing Light Podcast. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Yes, absolutely. So before I get to my questions, I saw this. I think it was on your Instagram. Your quote was, and I just love this. I think I'm going to just hang on to this. Grief is like glitter. You can throw a handful of glitter up in the air, but when you try to clean it up, you never get it all. Even long after the event, you will still find glitter tucked into corners. It will always be there somewhere. And that's just, to me, that is the perfect quote for grief. So let's talk about it a little bit. So you're a certified grief counselor, grief expert. So what does that mean for people who are grieving?
Yeah, so I experienced a family trauma. My 8-year-old daughter, Rachel, died in 1998. And so I was thrown into my own grief process. And during that period, I had an opportunity to do some speaking about organ donation because I was able to donate Rachel's organs. And in that process of speaking, I just saw that I could take a tragedy and inspire others. And I found that to be very, very powerful. So I knew at the time I was going through my acute stages of grief, but I also knew that there was a lot of hurting people out there, and everything that I was learning through it, I found that it's not taught. And so I just really kind of made a pact with myself that once I was in a place that I was able to help others, that I would share my own experience and my own lessons and help others to heal. So I just did some training and some courses, learned how to run the workshops, and took an educational approach to grief rather than become a therapist or counselor per se. So I've just kind of made it my purpose to teach people how to go through the grief process, because we're not taught that, and also how to support others who are going through it, because I found people were very ill-equipped to help support others through the process.
Yeah, it's much needed. I mean, I did a show about grief a while back, but what I know about it after looking at your website and your social media, it's like, maybe I just don't know enough. I think that when you talk about someone who's had a loss, I'm very sorry for your loss, Cheryl, but I can't imagine that, losing your child. I think it's something that is so hard to talk about. It's almost like it's a taboo subject when someone says they have a loss and they lose someone. I think people get, I don't want to say uncomfortable, but they don't know what to do, what to say.
Yeah.
When I lost my aunt, people posted, I'm sorry for your loss and all that, but that doesn't begin to comprehend, understand what somebody is truly going through. And I've had, I've grieved for my dad and other people that I lost and everyone else, but everyone has such a unique experience. But I think really, if you would agree that it's just something that people don't know how to have that conversation about.
Exactly. We're not taught that. And you're thrown into it like I was and like so many others are. And it's kind of a sink or swim kind of situation because there isn't a lot of education. And that's what I wanted to change, because when I was going through it, I needed to talk about it. Like, everybody grieves differently, but my way was I just needed to express it. And then you're right, like, people around me were uncomfortable with it. And I just thought, wow, this is bizarre to me, because everybody experiences loss. Nobody's getting out of here alive. Like, we're all going to experience this in some shape or form. And I really, really wanted to normalize the conversation. Like, it is so common that people are dealing with grief. It's as common as the weather. Why are we not talking about this? I just found it very bizarre.
Yeah, I would agree too. It's just, I don't know why. I think people have the best intentions, but they just don't know when it comes to subjects like grief and losing someone. People just don't know. I think a lot of it is people want to kind of fix it for you, and I want to make you feel better. And I think that people kind of go down that route.
Right.
And I think you're right. I think coming from it, rather than, because everyone can, there's a lot of people who can definitely benefit from therapy, but the educational part is I think really is extremely helpful. I find it extremely unique, the service that you provide, because there is, like anything else, knowledge is power. So education is key. And so I think it's a great approach, and it's the right path that for you to go down. So that's really incredible that you think of it that way, even though you are in the throes of your own loss of your daughter.
Yeah. It really, all the opportunities just seem to keep getting laid out in front of me. Like, it was like, when I look back, it's like I didn't even orchestrate all of this. It just seemed to be divine intervention, and the right people were put in my path, and the opportunities presented themselves. So it started in the hospital, when the doctor asked me if I had considered organ donation with Rachel. And I said no, but she had. And they were like, what? She was only 8 years old. But 5 weeks before our family came down with this flu virus, I was reading an article in the newspaper about a little boy who had undergone an organ transplant. He had got 2 new lungs. And Rachel started asking me questions about this picture and why he looked happy, because he looked like he was in a hospital. And I explained that he got new lungs and that's why he's happy, and how you get new lungs. And she went back to playing, and then a couple minutes later popped her head up and said, well, when I die, I want to give my organs so I can save kids. And I thought I had grossed her out with the conversation, but she just went away and her little mind was processing it, and she embraced that whole giving aspect of it. And so, then 5 weeks later, when she had a condition called ITP, complications from a flu virus, where your your antibodies attack the platelets instead of the virus, and it can get to a very, very low level. and there, you're supposed to be able to recover, but in less than 1% chance you can get a spontaneous bleed, and that can be recoverable as well, except that hers was in her brain, and so it didn't present the same way as if it would have in the other organs. And so they did brain surgery on her to remove the front left lobe of her brain, but her brain was too swollen and she was pronounced brain dead, which was why the opportunity to donate her organs. And then a few days later at her funeral, a friend of my brother's was at the funeral, and he worked for a newspaper, and he did a lot of articles about organ donation. And so he approached my brother to see if I would do an article in the newspaper. And at first I was like, no, my daughter died. It's not a news story. And then I thought about it and thought, wow, like she made that decision based on something that I saw in a newspaper. So I felt compelled to pay it forward. So I said yes to the article. It ended up on the front page of the Toronto Sun newspaper and a 2-page spread on page 4 and 5. And that friend of my brother's ended up winning an award for that story. And then his editor submitted it to the Chicken Soup for the Soul people, and it ended up on page 287 of Chicken Soup for the Parent Soul book. So it just seemed like all these opportunities were presenting itself. And I ended up being the national spokesperson for organ donation and traveled around and did speaking engagements about it, all under the guise knowing that I was going to have to go through my own healing process before I was ever going to be in a position to be able to teach others how to go through it.
Wow, that is incredible. That is incredible that out of this terrible tragedy, it's actually comes some good.
Yeah.
Wow, what an incredible journey that you've been on. So when I took psychology in college, I think a lot of people did.
Yeah, me included.
Yeah, I think everybody is taught by about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and her 5 stages of grief. Mm-hmm. And those are the basics. But when I grieved for my dad when he passed away, I was expecting, based on what I was told or taught, that I was supposed to go through these stages. Yeah. And to me, like, I couldn't get past, if I had to say it, like the bargaining phase. It's like, or I would go like out of order and all that. So if you could just touch upon that and kind of explain what that is, and then how it relates to how people grieve.
Yeah, I actually don't even touch on the stages in my teachings and through my courses and programs, because the stages were written to be able to express what a terminally ill person goes through, or someone who is going through terminal illness with a loved one. And she never meant it to be linear. And it just got taken out of context over the years. And so then people, because of the lack of education, like yourself, thought that there was like a way that you were supposed to go through them, or there was a pattern, or you were going to experience all of them. And not everybody experiences all the 5 stages. And if you do, you're right. You go into them in all kinds of different orders and different intensities. And people perceived that, well, I already went through the anger stage. Why am I angry again? Or I already did the sadness. Why am I sad again? And it's like, there is no order, and there is no specific way that you're going to grieve. It's so unorganized, and that's what I think messes with people, because then they think, well, am I doing it right? Am I okay? Am I not okay? And they're, just all these expectations of the way you're supposed to grieve, and it's just not true. And I think it really sets people back and impedes their healing process.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, it's just, yeah, because you're right. Because and I've said this before, that everyone is different. Everyone grieves differently. Now, my hairdresser lost her son to a motorcycle accident. And I remember talking to her about it, and she said that she goes, "Oh, Caitlin, don't misunderstand me." She goes, "I have my moments where I break down and cry." She says, oddly enough, she goes, I have a sense of peace about it.
Mm.
It's how she processes it, and she feels connected to him, because she says had signs from him, but she said she feels like an incredible sense of calm. Like she was really surprised that she wasn't breaking down and going into like a mental breakdown or crying.
Mm-hmm.
She said she has her moments, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of makes sense, because how you feel about different people that you lose, and yeah, that makes sense. So for her, that's her process. So
Yeah. Yeah. When we grieve, we bring all of us to the process. And that is your upbringing, your beliefs, your values, your culture, your personality, your religion, like all of it. You bring all of that to your process. And then you take into account the relationship that you had with that person, because you spoke to it, that everybody is so different. Even the same person dying, and like 10 different people grieving that person, they're going to grieve differently depending on like all those variables that I just said and the relationship with that person. And you can have peace around somebody passing, or you can have the biggest resistance and pain and trauma around the same situation that's happened.
yeah. So I wanted to ask you, as you mentioned, there are 5 things to never say to someone who's grieving. So I just want to go back to when we first started the conversation about how to help people in their grieving process when they've lost someone.
Right. So, I mean, this is such an open-ended conversation, and also dependent on the relationship that you have with that person. I know that, for many years, I would say, I'm sorry for your loss. It was just kind of a safe thing to say. But like you said, it's like it really doesn't speak to anything, and it didn't really like land for me when people said that. Um, I things that upset me during that time, and things that my clients have said to me, that, like they're in a better place. Intellectually, that might be true, but that does nothing for the person that is grieving, and or they had a good life. Well, that also might be intellectually true, but it doesn't mean that you don't want more life with that person. So there's a lot of things that do nothing to move somebody's grief forward. So these intellectual things that, like you said earlier, trying to make people feel better. Well, their response in their sadness or their anger or however they are experiencing or expressing their grief is appropriate. It's like, oh, don't be sad. What of course they're going to be sad. They're supposed to be sad. It's appropriate to be sad, but at the same time, you don't have to be bawling your eyes out every day either. Like some people would criticize. It's like, well, I don't know. She's not even like crying. Like, what's wrong with her? Like, there's just so much judgment around it. So I think that you should always take the griever's lead on things, ask questions, and sometimes you don't necessarily know what you need, but if you ask them, like, how can I best support you? Is there something that you need? Would you rather talk about it or not talk about it? Like, take their lead, because you cannot assume that you know what that person needs, or that they need a cheer up, or maybe they just need a shoulder to cry on. Maybe they just need to talk. Maybe they just need to be quiet and go for a walk and not talk. So, it depends on the relationship. It depends on the person. But I always encourage people to take their lead and ask questions about what that person needs.
Yeah, that's great advice, and makes a heck of a lot more sense than, yeah. All right. So you also mentioned something about grief being a journey and not a destination. So, and can you expand on that as well?
Well, yeah, because grief never actually ends. The program that I lead with my clients, it helps them get complete. And the word complete can be a little deceiving because it could give you the notion that, after you've worked with me 8 weeks, the grief is finished. But the grief is never finished. What I mean by getting complete is getting complete with the pain so that the pain is no longer running the show. Because once you've experienced a traumatic loss, then that is going to stay with you for the rest of your life. I will never not miss my daughter.
Mm.
Like, I was having a conversation on the weekend with a young lady who just separated from her husband. And, she's a young woman. And I said, how old are you? And she said 34. And I just got this pang in my heart. And I thought, oh my gosh, Rachel would have been 34.
Mm.
And I just like the reality of that. And I remember leaving my husband at 31, so all those milestones and all those ages and experiences that you carry on through your life are always going to be a reminder of them, things that you are not experiencing with them or that they're missing, from their physical life.
Mm.
But having said that, I also remember talking to a woman who was expressing how her relationship had changed with her daughter. Now their daughter turned 25. It's like, yeah, it's interesting to see how my relationship's changed. And I said, yeah, I'm kind of jealous about that. I said, because I didn't get a chance to see Rachel grow up in her 20s and become a woman and all that. And I said, I really wish that I had experienced, a changing relationship. And my friend said, are you sure that you have not experienced that? And I sat with that for a little bit and I thought about it and I thought, no, she's right. My relationship actually has changed with Rachel over the years. It might not be in a physical way, but definitely in a spiritual way and in a heart way. It's definitely changed over the years.
Mm. Wow. I love that. I absolutely love that. I really think by you saying that actually gives people hope. I really feel that people need hope
Mm.
when they've suffered a loss, and I don't want to sound cliche, but I always say it does get better. Um, it really does, and like you said, you just have this new relationship with your daughter. That's not in the physical sense, but definitely in the spiritual sense and how you approach that. So, and then I found it interesting is that you said the number one question that you're asked is, am I normal? Is that true?
Yeah. Yeah, because people question themselves, like I was saying earlier, am I doing it right? Or am I okay? Or should I be feeling this way? And you kind of get a case of the crazies. Like I remember, I don't particularly use the stages in my teachings, but I do remember liking to hear about the stages when I was going through it because it gave me a framework. It gave me something to frame what I was experiencing so that I wasn't losing my mind as I thought I was. So yeah, underneath, I know that a lot of times the question might not be framed that way, but I can tell that that's what they're asking. It's like, am I normal? Am I doing this right? Because they start expressing what they're experiencing. And I think they're looking for some validation. And I do not believe that time heals. Like, I just think that that's
Yeah.
a setup. I personally, but probably because I do this work, it's like I believe it was the grief work. It's what you do with that time that heals your heart. So I am an advocate of doing the grief work so that you can move forward and integrate that grief into your life to be able to move forward in a healthy way.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that I don't like that saying at all. Time heals.
No. The hair on the back of my neck
Yeah,
just stands up on end when I hear it.
No, that's not true. The same thing, like
Yeah.
saying to
I
someone that,
remember my girlfriend calling me. Her dad had died, and she called me. It was 9 months. She said, "Cheryl, this just keeps getting worse. Like, everybody said it would get better." And I said, "Well, the longer it is, the more you miss them." And she's like, "Oh my gosh, nobody ever said that." And it's like, yeah, everybody thinks that this time is such a wonderful thing. It's like, no, the longer they're gone, the more you miss them.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm so glad you said that. So then I want to talk about when you mentioned, I saw something about grief brain. So what is grief brain?
Well, um, in the early stages, I remember driving my son, and I pulled over to the side of the road, and I broke down crying. And Sean said, "What's wrong, Mommy?" And I said, "I can't remember where we're going." And he said, "We're going to get me a haircut." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Where is the hairdresser?" And he said, "Oh, it's right beside the Heart store." And there was this little store that was beside the hairdresser and had little hearts in the window. So the kids called it the Heart store. And so I had to get myself organized and figure out where I was, first of all, and then where the hairdresser was, and then how to get from where I am to get to where I'm going.
Oh,
So that was an experience of grief brain. Like,
oh,
you just can't put the thoughts together. The concentration isn't there. The focus isn't there. The breakdown. I mean, the fact that I didn't know where I was and I had to pull over to the side of the road and start crying. Like, there's just this feeling of overwhelm. And I remember feeling like I had brain damage.
oh,
And then years and years later, I had a concussion, and I was leading a grief group, and the ladies were telling me about their symptoms. And I was experiencing the same symptoms from my concussion at the time. And I said, I just want to tell you that it feels like you have brain damage, because it is like having brain damage. I said, I am right now experiencing a traumatic brain injury, and I am experiencing the same symptoms that you are describing. And I can tell you, many years ago, when I was in the acute stages of my grief, I felt like I had brain damage. And I said, and now I can tell you with all certainty, it is exactly like having brain damage.
well, you're absolutely right.
Yeah,
So because your body does hold grief, it absolutely does. That,
absolutely.
and it does make you normal. It really does.
Hmm.
Yeah, I absolutely get that. That is because that is so true. Whenever you have trauma, and that's really what grieving is traumatic. Traumatic events.
Yeah,
It imparts itself onto your body. You're
yeah.
absolutely
And at
so.
first I thought that was cruel, but now I can see how it's kind,
Mm,
because my brain couldn't take in all of that information and process it. And so it would just bring it in little bits, and just allow a little bit. And it was protecting me from everything.
Yeah, you're
So
absolutely.
the fact that your brain kind of shuts down, it's like a protector.
Yeah, it's a way of protect. You're absolutely 100% correct. Yeah. And finally, I wanted to ask you about the empty chairs.
Mm. Yeah, so that's an interesting one. I mean, if you take it in the literal sense, um, when you go through the first year and that empty chair around the dining room table, or the empty chair at the kitchen table, or at the island, or any special occasion you're having, or even a regular dinner that you're having, or regular lunch or breakfast, and that empty chair is there, and it can feel like you're desperate to fill that chair, or acknowledge that chair. And I remember there was a Christmas that my mom wanted to set the table and set a place for my daughter, because it just seemed weird to have that empty chair and that empty spot at the table. And she needed to do that. So it's like, Mom, whatever you need to do to comfort yourself. Um, and then, she stopped doing it after, I think she did it once. But yeah, there is that empty chair and that emptiness that you feel in your heart. It's like it just is, it's a physical um, representation of what's going on in our heart, right? There's an emptiness there. There's a blank.
Uh, wow, that's really profound. Yeah, absolutely. So I think we've got a better understanding of how I can support and how others can support someone who's in the grieving process. Um, and you really touched on what it's like to, speaking from a personal experience, what it's like when you grieve and what you've experienced, and all things that you might go through. What else would you say that you think is important for people to understand about grief and what the process is like?
Um, what the process is like. Well, just that it's it's not going to be the same for any two people. And the other huge thing that I learned that I would warn people about is that when you go through a traumatic loss, it's not just that loss that you are grieving. When I was grieving Rachel, it's like the whole ground got dug up. And I
Mm,
had all these unresolved other losses in my life that had gone unacknowledged, unexpressed, and unresolved. So I wasn't just grieving the loss of Rachel. I mean, as along with Rachel's death, I lost my daughter, but
mm,
Sean lost his sister.
mm.
I lost a role in my life. I lost a friend circle of all her girlfriends, moms, that. So, like, there's all these other domino losses that happen when you have that loss. But also, I had 3 miscarriages that, for me, it wasn't even on my radar that that was grief.
Mm.
And other losses in my life that weren't even associated with death that had been unresolved. So learning that grief was associated with not just death but other things in my life was very profound. So to just kind of be prepared for other things to get driven up when you have a traumatic loss, like, a death of a loved one.
Yeah, wow. That is so true.
Yeah.
Wow, you're
I
right.
worked with this woman that her husband had died. So she lost her husband, but she lost her partnership, she lost her lifestyle, her financial status. She couldn't work, so she lost her job, she lost her confidence. Like, I mean, it's just like on and on and on, these other losses that are wrapped up in a death.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct.
Yeah, and she ended up working with me. She did my program,
Yeah.
and she looked at all her other losses that were unresolved, and she even looked back when she was 19 and her dad shut her down around her artwork and wanting to pursue her art. And, when she finished the program and got complete with the loss of her husband, she left her job, she sold her house, and she moved to another province and went back to art school and followed her dream that had been put on the shelf back when she was 19. And now she's a practicing artist.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Oh, that is absolutely incredible. I love it. Just it's amazing that it's just how in depth it goes. So,
Oh, yeah.
now, if someone wanted to get help from you and reach out to you, how do they? Because I definitely want people to come to you, because I think that your service you offer is essential and much needed. So, how do people reach you?
Sure. Well, you can reach me through the website. It's www.adaptdna, so adaptdna.com. And there's free resources on the website. There's a free download, The 7 Stepping Stones to Reclaiming Your Life After Loss. And I'm also on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, TikTok. So, I mean, I can certainly give you my Linktree links to all my links. And my book that I've published called My Good Grief, Healing from Loss is available on Amazon. So lots of ways to find healing for sure.
Right, absolutely. Thank you so much. I mean, it's just something that I have been really wanting to talk about, for a while now. And I thought I understood what grief was, and then, just talking to you, just really, it's going to help me be a better friend to my friends, and have a better experience, and help them the best way I can. So,
Nice.
so thank you.
It's such a profound privilege to sit with somebody in their grief, and wanting to be a good friend, and wanting to, create that sacred space between, in a relationship. It's a beautiful thing.
It truly is. Well, thank you so much for talking with me tonight. I really appreciate it. You really shined a light on something that's not a lot of people like to talk about. It's very hard to talk about, but it's necessary. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Oh, thank you very much. You're very welcome. My pleasure.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Caitlin.